Ninamani. I'm Catherine Barnes from the University of South Australia and member of the Oceania RDA Committee. Last week we had the pleasure of hearing about the practical implementation of official RDA at the National Library of New Zealand. This week, Anouskha and Teresa have kindly offered to hold a Q&A where you will have the opportunity to ask questions, clarify aspects and learn more about their world-leading project. Anouskha is the Team Leader Collection Description at the National Library of New Zealand and formerly chair of ORDAC. She has been deep in RDA in many years, leading the library's work on developing policy statements and documentation for the official RDA Toolkit. Teresa Preston has worked in many different roles in libraries such as reference and research librarian, cataloguer, selector, collection manager and library manager with an occasional foray into records management. Much of her career has been in special libraries, but she's also worked in academic and public libraries. Since joining National Library of New Zealand, she's led the development and delivery of the library's official RDA training. And our current ORDAC representative to the RDA Steering Committee, Charlotte Christensen, will also be supporting Anouskha and Teresa. Charlotte is a professionally registered librarian in New Zealand with a background in public libraries and 2 decades experience in cataloguing. She is a member of ORDAC and currently, beyond her involvement in official RDA, also a member of the working group behind subject access to Maori materials and provides cataloguing standards advice to the New Zealand Public Library Consortium of over 40 libraries. So share with us your questions in the chat and Teresa and Anouskha will take control now.
Right, welcome back everyone. Let's begin with a karakia. Charlotte, if you can just move the slide. Thank you. Right. E te atua kupu kupu, whakatohia o kupu o te mātauranga, I o mātou pūmaharatanga. Hine ngaro ano hoki, muri ora, muri tū, muri tau, mai I te ao, I te pō, I te pō, I te ao. Tūturu whakamauia kia tina, tina. Homie, huie, tai kie. We started our training webinars with this karakia because we wanted to create an atmosphere of everyone learning together. You remember from last week's presentation that although the senior staff had been deep in RDA for a long time, we hadn't been doing a lot of practical cataloguing. So everyone went through the training together. This karakia seemed appropriate today because although we have already implemented official RDA, we are still learning. And we hope that today we will all learn from each other. We have about almost an hour today, so we thought we'd try and be a bit organised. Based on last week's questions, we thought we'd start with these areas. We'll get you to put any questions about the first topic in the chat now. That's getting to know Toolkit. When we've answered those questions, we'll move on to the second topic. So if you've got questions about the second or third topics, please hold them from now. I'm sure we'll get to them. So, have you got the chat up? Oh, right. There is nothing in the chat as yet. People are still thinking.
I will say too that Charlotte is fully prepared to dive into demonstration mode. So if anybody's got specific questions that they would like to see how that looks in the toolkit, Charlotte is all ready to go.
We started with this topic first because we found it is so important to be comfortable with Toolkit as a thing itself without actually worrying about the content of it. And it's little things like how to read a page, how to move around. One of the things we found very interesting quite early on was that in our context, we're very used to reading left to right. But I don't know whether Charlotte actually just wants to show us the page while people think about, oh, have we got a question?
Yes, we have one question so far. What is the best way to learn the pathways in the toolkit? Which is a great question. Thank you. And this is probably, you know, as Teresa has begun to touch on, the best way to learn the pathways is to actually get into the toolkit and start getting comfortable with how it functions. So Charlotte, do you want to talk a little bit about how you navigate the element page?
Sure. To Teresa's point about reading the page, what we've found is that the information we've put in our policy statements is what we want people to read first. So we read from the right, and then we move to the left and read on the left. And it makes a significant difference when you get to something like a policy statement. This policy statement we apply, and there's some further information. This one we don't apply. And if you don't read this first, you're taking time reading all this other information before you actually discover that you never needed to read it in the first place. Do you want me to talk more about structure?
Yeah. Yep. Or I was thinking maybe just show how you switch between somebody else's policy statements, because I might be thinking, that's what the National Library of New Zealand is doing, but what's the British Library doing, or Library of Congress? So that's a nice feature now that wherever you are on the page, it's really easy to get to the different policy statements, whereas in an earlier release you had to scroll all the way back up to the top. But now it's just a quick flick. So let's see. Oh yeah. And that, if it depends on what you might be using the toolkit for, but if you want to flick between policy statements, it's really nice just to see this is what we do. What does somebody else do? We've got a second question. Do we have any tips about how we deal with getting lost in the toolkit?
There are a few things about the toolkit that can make it easier. One of them is we go up on a page, and if you still can't find something familiar, you go back. Because a lot of the time what you're doing is going from one page, following a link to another page, perhaps then following to another page, and then wondering, how did I get where I was going? So the up, I don't recognize this bit, and back until you recognize, oh, that's what I was doing, is one of the big patterns that we teach.
Some of the pathways are quite complicated, and when you first start, you do tend to go back a bit and then actually repeat things you've done, but at least you're in the right place.
Another tip that we offer in our own context, because we have taught our cataloguers to work from our metadata application profiles, like in case of emergency, you bail out and you go back. You start at the beginning. You go back to the metadata application profile and then start from there. Where was I? Oh, that's right. I was trying to find a value for this element. Okay, and then just working it through from the beginning again.
It does take a while to get familiar with it. It does happen, but it's just about giving yourself time and practice, just spending lots of time and starting to recognise what it looks like and what it all means.
Recognising where you are on a page is also partly to do with recognising that pages have a very deliberate structure. So every element page starts with the definition and scope. It has the element reference box, which you may well have closed up. We elected to have ours open on loading. It then has pre-recording, which is the space where you decide, is this really the element I need, or did I need a different element for what I'm doing? Then recording. Now this can be a long section or it can be a short section, but everything under here is about recording a value for the element for the page I'm on. And then the recording section is divided into the 4 methods: recording an unstructured description. Somewhere further down it will be, this won't be a good example because this particular one's only unstructured. Recording a structured description, recording an identifier, recording an IRI. And those 4 sections are always there. So if you know you're on an element page to record an unstructured description value and you find yourself down here, you can work backwards and go, well, no, I'm in the wrong place because this is not the thing that I'm doing.
I'm not sure about that question.
So we've got another great question. Do we have any tips for copy catalogers using the toolkit? And this one's a bit tricky because we aren't really copy cataloging at the moment. All of our data is, we are creating official RDA descriptions. And that does mean that when we start with some data that has been created by another institution, we are evaluating and overriding it with what the official toolkit, our decisions have been for the official toolkit. But that really does get to the heart of what copy cataloging is that we have to make decisions about when we are using metadata from another source, what are the things that we care about and want to change, and what are the things that we are happy to accept if we wouldn't do them that way, but it's quite all right to accept that data into our database. So not sure how the best way of identifying those in the toolkit. There are different ways. You could use bookmarks to do that, or you could do metadata application profiles that are very clear about, you know, for which elements you will accept data and for which elements you will change data.
It's not really
yeah, we haven't quite, it's on our list because we do need to take that next step, but we haven't figured out the best way to suit our needs, so how we document that exactly. We're really clear about if we're creating data following official RDA, what we do, but we haven't yet done that next level of evaluation when we will decide what we will accept without changing.
I suppose in conjunction with that, the point at which you have a copy cataloger working within the toolkit is a bit of a borderline case anyway. I mean, copy catalogers to a large extent will work off a checklist or some kind of document that you have telling them what they should be changing and what they should not be changing. And so you would tailor your own documentation to make sense of that. But it is, as Anouskha was just saying, that level of, well, what is it that you want them to change and what is it you want them to leave alone? At the point at which they are entering the toolkit, it's then more about, well, why are they going into the toolkit? What support documentation do they need at that point? How much do they need to know in order to answer that question? So it does tend to go institution by institution. I think we have a hand up as well as another question in the chat.
I can't see any.
I don't know. Can we actually?
I can't see hands up.
No.
Julie James has got her hand up. Oh, no, she's put it down again.
Yeah.
Perhaps, Julie, if you could put your question into the chat.
Are we going to answer this one?
We're going to answer
this one. Yes, we will answer this one because you.
Thanks, Eve. How do we recognise soft-deprecated elements in the toolkit?
And it's probably easiest if Charlotte actually just shows you what one looks like, because the toolkit will tell you.
I thought that was on that page. That's okay. If we look up,
Pick one.
Yeah, all the details of.
don't actually know the names of any of these because I never use them.
No, we decided not to use them.
But it's under that pre-recording heading.
It is. So there are two things that indicate a soft deprecated element. Firstly, the statement, the following option is recommended. This is the only place where you'll see that wording. And then it is followed by an option that points you to a different element. And remember, this is at the pre-recording. I was talking about how the pre-recording section will reinforce whether you're at the right element. So if you are making use of the National Library of New Zealand policy statements and you've decided you want to record a value of note on extent of manifestation, when you get here and you're told to apply this option, you're being sent away from using this element. You're being told, no, don't use this one, use that one. And if the two of you want to see whatever was coming next there, I'll see if I can find the guidance part about soft deprecated elements.
Not another question, but just a tip on copy cataloging. The suggestion is you could have a copy cataloging checklist in the toolkit, like in a document in the toolkit, in the same way that we have our documents in the toolkit, and then you could link to the elements that need to be evaluated. So you could structure it like that.
There it is there. So the soft deprecated elements exist in the RDA toolkit, but they are elements which the RDA steering committee is considering removing from the toolkit. They will not be removed without due process. There will be a proposal, a call for feedback and some discussion, and it will come up at an RSC meeting. But it's worth thinking very carefully before making use of soft deprecated elements in your training plan, if those elements may in fact disappear over time. So for that reason, National Library of New Zealand has elected not to make use of these at this time.
Any more? Should we?
If there are no more questions about navigating the toolkit or the structure of the toolkit, we could move on to questions that are more about the values for specific RDA elements or RDA elements in general. Or the content, I guess.
Yeah,
You've got
content.
Questions about the content of RDA.
Yes, I think we just called this one determining values for RDA elements because that's what people want to do. They want to go straight to the actually using it. But anything wider?
Just while we're waiting for people to think about that, if I go back to our soft deprecated element, and change the policy statements, you can see what different institutions are doing for this particular element.
Okay. Oh gosh.
I've got a quick question. Could you please elaborate the difference between a value for an element and the actual element itself?
Yes. Do one of you want to do this, or am I going to talk this one through?
I was looking at you to talk it through, Sharon.
looking at me. I've just lost my cameras for a moment. There we go. So if we take an element such as manifestation title proper. Title proper is an element within the manifestation entity. That is my element name. The value of title proper will be the title that's on the manifestation I'm describing. So it will be what I have usually transcribed for this value. And a nice way to think about it is in terms of the verbalized label, and you'll always find that under this element reference box. It's usually the first one. So I can say that my manifestation has title proper and then the value. So this manifestation that I'm describing has a value of this, and that value is a value of title proper. So it puts it together in a sentence. And the same is true if you picked something like content type. So we find out what content type is. Content type is an element of the expression entity. And I can say that my expression has content type still image or spoken word or text. So those are the values of the element content type, which is an element of the entity expression. Please say so if I haven't been clear or if you'd like a particular example.
I think this question is also possibly about the difference between recording a value of an element to describe another element as well, perhaps.
Possibly, but I'm not sure we want to go.
That might be a bit deep for today, right? Yes. So the next question is, what sorts of questions did NLNZ ask when working out what elements to use?
I can take that one because that was way, way back in the beginning of our project. We started with the core element set from original RDA and the elements for which we had already made policy for an original RDA on the basis that if we'd made policy, obviously we cared about it. And that gave us, you know, pretty much the core set of elements that we are mostly using today. So yeah, that was where we started. And the real question was really, what are the elements that are necessary to describe the resources which we collect? And the answer we had at the time was the core element set from original RDA alongside anything else that we had made policy for.
I think just to expand on that a little bit, we also very early on made the call that we wanted to use the most granular element to answer the question where we could. So where there was more than one possibility, we went as narrow as we could to be specific.
I think related to that is also that question of there was a lot of thinking about why are we doing what we're doing? Yeah. And so there was, as time went on, there was a lot of thinking about, are we just going to repeat it and, oh, look, here's an element that suits, or are we going to consider, should we be recording this information now? Do we still keep doing it this way?
Catherine's question next.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. The question is there anything we implemented specific to dual language? And I suppose the obvious thing is if the manifestation at hand happens to be a parallel aggregate with two or more language expressions of a single work, then yes, we have implemented the aggregates model in order to describe those. I'm not sure if that's what you mean by dual language though, because in some cases we will have manifested a single work that happens to be expressed in multiple languages. But Charlotte's pulled out one of our favourite options where we have had to specify we have had to specify this is common in publications in New Zealand where the Māori and English names of an organisation appear together, and it's not a parallel, they're not like parallel values, they are a single value that is expressed in more than one language. So we've just had to like tweak our policy statements to make it clear that's what we're doing. It's not two values in two languages, it's a single value and two languages.
Did you want me to bring up the parallel aggregates guidance?
I'm not sure.
We'll ask the audience that and they can let
Well,
us know.
I'm asking, I'm thinking the audience, is that because we're happy to go as deep as you like. It was an area where we've had to think a lot and very carefully because we might pick up a manifestation and there might be more than one language or script, but that does not necessarily mean it's one thing or the other. And we had to like train ourselves to be really careful about what is this thing? Is it really one work? Is it more than one work? And if for each of those words, are they expressed in what languages have they been expressed in?
They want to see the aggregates guidance.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of yes pleases. This is.
You want to just talk through and I'll scroll. Someone in our chat has pointed out the parallel elements are self-deprecated, and we're not using any parallel elements. I think that's something to point out. We're choosing to record, so we're not recording values for parallel title proper. We are only recording values for title proper, and that does have follow-on implications for how we arrive at a value for title proper if there's no collective title, which possibly way too deep for today. But it is available. Like if you really want to dive deep into particularly aggregates, I don't think parallel aggregates is up on our training material.
No, parallel aggregate, there will be a niche Academy tutorial on parallel aggregates coming at the end of June. But after the next toolkit release, so that we have nice clean screenshots for you. So should we just talk through our what do we do when we start coming to describe the manifestation at hand? We ask our cataloguers to decide if it's an aggregate manifestation or not, and in most cases it will be an aggregate manifestation. But we ask them to work through the guidance and just think about what it is we have. There are some kinds of works embodied in manifestations that we commonly see, which are technically works. They are technically works. And this came up, you won't be surprised, like on the first day of training, we thought everything was nice and clear, and then cataloguers being cataloguers. Do we count these as works? Do we count these as works? Do we count these as works?
So we have got this list of material that just technically they are works that have been aggregated in the manifestation, but for our purposes, which is to get to a metadata application profile that we can then work through as quickly as possible, we just count these. These are not intended to be, they are kind of superfluous in a lot of ways. So we ask them to don't count them. And then once we've discounted the things that we're not going to count as works, we count how many works are left. And then of those works, we decide is there one that is predominant or most important and everything else is supplementary, or do we have a collection of works which are more or less they're equal in weight? And then we work down, so if you've got more than one sort of main work, it's a collection aggregate. And then if you've got one main aggregated work and that work has more than one expression, it's a parallel aggregate. If it's just one main work and one expression and supplementary works, then it's an augmentation aggregate. And if it's just one work, one expression, non-aggregate. And then from there, the cataloguers can choose the correct map to use to then describe their manifestation. So further down our guidance here, we do have more explanation. So if you're not really sure, you might work through the definition from the toolkit of a collection aggregate. We've got some examples of the kinds of things we commonly see. We've got a visual, like some of us like pictures. And then some people process the information more in like a tabular form. So we have tried to like give different options for the way people process the information. And then further down in the document, we've got full examples if people want to go there. Just tricky. I feel like every time we look at this, we see another thing that we haven't picked up because we've changed a lot over time. I think that's the caveat with all our documentation is sometimes we've created documentation and then we've rethought things and we haven't always caught earlier decisions, but
it's a work in progress.
Work in progress. Work in progress. So if we go, Charlotte, if we go back to parallel aggregates.
Sorry.
So if we've decided that what we have in our hand is actually two or more language expressions or two or more expressions, and the ones we see most commonly, of course, are language expressions of a single work, then we would use our static parallel aggregate text map, which click on a link because we've just renamed it. So yeah, our aggregates document is being updated later today, but this is we've been tidying up our documentation but that's where we get to. And then once we know what we have in hand, the map just tells us what to do.
So down the bottom there's, yes, it's got the aggregated and the aggregating expressions.
Yeah. It's the thing with all the aggregates that you do have to think very carefully when you get to describing the work or describing the works embodied in that aggregate manifestation. The decisions we've made different decisions depending on the type of aggregate, or sometimes we want to describe the aggregating work. Sometimes we only want to describe the aggregated work or works. So this part of the maps are very, you have to be careful. You know, it's not just all of the works are treated the same. We have made different decisions based on whether we feel it's important to describe one or the other.
Why did NLNZ decide to list the map elements in alphabetical order? Because there is no correct order, is the answer. Everybody approaches their work slightly differently, and we had to pick an order for our maps. And this at least meant that if you knew the element you wanted, you could find it.
Yeah.
And it is split by they asked split by entity as well. And so it's,
some of you may notice that we haven't kept it in WEMI order. That was a decision too, that the manifestation is most of the elements that we record relate to the manifestation. So we put the manifestation first. So we haven't been sort of, yeah, sort of alphabetical, but sort of modified.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got a really specific question. So a question about linking fields such as a 510 citation references note. Should we leave that to the mark one? Yeah, let's leave that for when we're talking about encoding.
Right.
In terms of the RDA side of that, that is one of the very, very few elements where we don't. Oh no, it's okay. They just took a moment to load. Right, we can cover that later. I thought we didn't have policy statements against that one.
Yeah, we'll come back to that one because it's like a kind of a encoding question. Well, and not really actually. So the question is about citation references which have mapped to the element manifestation described by. And this may be the only way to differentiate between two different instances of an early printed book. So notes are often mapped to work, which may lead to merging of different early printed book bid records.
We need our rare books catalogue here.
Yeah, I'm not so familiar with rare books, but our common citation for sort of earlier printed New Zealand books is what's colloquially we refer to as Bagnall. There's a long part to it, but it's Bagnall, and he's cited as Bagnall in that. And Bagnall citations usually refer to a specific manifestation. I think if we wanted to refer to a particular item-specific differences, then we're scooting across into note on item territory.
There was a comment at the last RSC's public session about the Rare Books Manual and how it relates to official RDA, and the official answer to that seems to be that it is official RDA aligned. So it is not 100% official RDA all by itself. However, it is very closely aligned. That manual does make use of currently soft deprecated elements. And the message from the RSC was that if you are following that manual as your cataloging tool, even after they are removed from the RDA toolkit, if in fact that happens, you would still be able to take that approach of being more granular, because the RDA parts of the record would still be compliant with RDA, and you're just acknowledging that for these other parts, RDA, official RDA, is not specific enough for the purpose of rare book cataloging. So there is something in there about just because there isn't a specific enough element for the purpose of a particular type of description doesn't mean you have to just stop using RDA. It can work in conjunction with more specific things.
So we have the question that we hadn't answered. Can we think of an element where we evaluated our current practice or our practice under original RDA and then decided not to use an official RDA element? Apart from the soft deprecated ones, I can't think of which.
Very often it's that in official RDA we've gotten more specific. I have a feeling there's something in there around reproductions or facsimiles, but it's very difficult to remember the ones that you decided not to look at ever again.
Yeah, I think there's like 1,200 elements that we've decided we don't record, and once we record that we don't record them, we just put them out of our heads. I think there's maybe more than 1,200. Yeah, I should go and count them up. I can't think of anything. I mean, apart from the soft deprecated elements.
It's the obvious ones.
Yeah.
Perhaps not elements, but there have certainly been times when we've chosen to change how we record something because we've realized that there may be a better place to put that. I'm kind of leaning into the encoding questions here. But things where perhaps in the past we may have recorded an unstructured description, a note, and we can now use a separate field where that information can be recorded as a structured description or an identifier so that it's available as a search facet or computer controlled.
I think I'll answer Eb's question and then we'll move on to encoding because we've only got about 10 minutes to go. So will we be re-evaluating some of the elements we've currently decided not to use? For example, the representative expression elements, and the answer is yes. There were two kind of large chunks of elements that we decided up front that we weren't going to look at right away, and that's the manifestation statement elements and the representative expression elements. But as time has gone on and we are more comfortable with the toolkit as a whole, and as we're moving into areas such as music, we are re-evaluating representative expressions. So yeah, we just...
And serial works.
And serial works, yeah.
Serial works.
Serial works, and then it came up again with aggregates. Things keep coming back with aggregates. But yeah, as we work through and as we implement more formats, we come back to things. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is fixed forever. Okay, so we'll move on to encoding and sort of talking more in terms of bibliographic records now. And the first question is the good one. How do you advise how to deal with a link to WorldCat entities as they seem to clutter bib records? And they do look messy, somewhat messy and unreadable with that link added. So would it be better to add them to authority records? And if yes, what would that look like? So the link to the WorldCat entities is essentially a link to an authority record for OCLC's entities. The works, so it works, don't people...
Events?
Don't.
Have they done events?
But anyway, they're OCLC's entities, so they are, they're not directly equivalent to RDA entities, and that's kind of it's an interesting kind of, we're getting into the interesting times where we're moving towards less of an authority record environment and more of an entity management environment where we will be to make those decisions about whether an entity in one system is the same as an entity in another system. So the links are really important. Those identifiers are really important to be able to say, definitely, that's, you know, OCLC's declared that this is what the work is. And we might say, actually, what we've got in our hand is an RDA work. And if we had the infrastructure, we could link URIs to our description of an RDA work. And then you might say, well, they're kind of the same, or they're not the same. But yeah, it is, in terms of bibliographic records at the moment, it is a little bit overwhelming. Yeah, so my advice is really, it's up to individual institutions. Do you want to have them inside your database? And if you don't, then you need to look at ways of excluding them. And that will be different, I guess, for every LMS. When we decide we don't want data from OCLC's records, we have normalization rules attached to all our import profiles that just strip it out and we never see it. This question, how are we handling the related terms in our catalogue? Some of them are very confusing to users. Most of them are confusing to users because the catalogue is not for users. We record them in our MARC records, but we do not display them in our discovery layer. That's essentially what it is. We keep them for us and not for our users. We've got some currently creeping through to our discovery layer, but we are working on hiding them.
To be happening like
It's
that.
not meant to be happening like that, yes.
There is an interesting thing about those related terms. I mean, it feels like they've been around forever, but in fact they were a new thing with original RDA. They never existed before then. In terms of the approach we're taking with official RDA, there is no concept of relationship designators in official RDA, but we are using that same space to include the element name so that we can identify what the value is for when it gets moved out of MARC into whatever it is it gets moved out into sometime in the future. So we're future-proofing by using that. It does mean some of that language is really unhelpful to the end user.
Which is why we hide it. It's not meant to be seen. So that's a good question. What did we discover were some of the more problematic MARC fields for encoding official RDA? What's your favourite, Charlotte?
The 100.
Yeah,
It's probably my favorite.
We talked about last week.
The 100 field, it comes back to MARC being created in order to print cards. It was designed to print cards, and the presence of a 1XX field meant you had to have another card because there was another drawer to put a card in. And it doesn't have any real value within a computerized searchable system. We continue to use it at this point, but it's flagged as one of the areas we want to change. Do we want to talk a little bit about the 758?
No, but we stopped doing that.
I
For now.
meant bad. Yeah.
Do you have your Alma?
I am just going to get it up. I just saw that question.
Showing the actual example of record with the element name. So if you give us a moment.
I'll find one. I have to find something that's actually catalogued. Try this one. Been doing a lot of searches recently for things that are not.
I think the 300B, going back to Bridget's question, I think the 300B remains problematic because you can squash several different RDA values for several different RDA elements into that single subfield, which makes it really hard to identify what the value was actually supposed to be, which element that value was supposed to be attached to. Someone does want to hear about 758. You can talk quickly through what happened with the 758. Kind of touches on the links to WorldCat entities because they come in as 758s. So in our records, you can see wherever we've got an option to record a relationship, we've used the RDA element label. And the beauty of that, as Charlotte said, is that we know exactly what we've got. At least in records that we've created since moving to official RDA. You can see. Sorry, you go. Are you going to talk about the 7.5?
I was just going to say that I should be at the front, and we know that, and that's somewhat irrelevant to the computer.
Yeah. So tricky that in our brain it says it should be at the beginning, but then that's extra work to move it. So we've got a sort of semi-automated process for putting them in. So these expression manifested, the values for the expression manifested. It's a little bit more work to put them in because we are also creating local authority records for those works and expressions that we are describing. But yeah, but our system, it puts the I in at the end, and we just gonna leave it for now. Because as Charlotte says, it doesn't matter to the computer. Yeah, so the 758 is where when we first implemented, we're recording, so I just want to walk it back. We are recording for everything, either if every manifestation we describe, we're actually recording the element either expression manifested or work manifested, at least one. And then now we were deciding where to record it, and it seemed like the best place to put that would be in a 758, which is a kind of link to description of a work, but we didn't have the infrastructure in order to be able to mint the identifiers, because the field is really needing an identifier. And so we experimented in the short term of just putting strings in that mark field, but then we found it really hard to manage those within our database. And so we've moved to just using 7XX fields as appropriate.
There was a question about the fixed fields, which NLNZ have decided are outside. Possibly easiest explained looking at our encoding document.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd like me to answer this one.
Yeah, I just want to think what to say. So rather, I think did we talk about it last week about, that it's possible that we could say that recording data in a fixed field was in some way also recording the value of an RDA element, but then we went down
Language of expression.
Yeah, and it was, I think where we came down to, we had a lot of discussions about what the fixed fields represent and whether it was an identifier, is it but in the end, a lot of what's in the fixed fields repeats data that is encoded elsewhere in the mark record. So we don't feel like we need to take data twice out of mark. So if we've accounted for it once, then that's enough. And we count the fixed fields as it's outside the scope of RDA because it's about the functioning of the mark record rather than being about recording data from RDA.
I think one of the ones that really tangled us up for a long time when we were trying to think of the fixed fields as RDA values was the date 1 and date 2. It's all very well when you have a date that is a year, but then sometimes using mark you can have a date which is a couple of numbers and some U's, or you can have pipes.
Yeah.
And those are not numbers. Those are
No.
not the same information. I know we're getting close on time.
So we'll just
the
answer that one last question. RDA Basics 101 course we can do. Yes, there is. And Teresa will tell us about it.
We have put our training out there. I mean, it is geared towards libraries which are using our policy statements, but it is particularly the earlier pathways, I think they call them in niche, about, they are quite generic and get you started. And there is other things out there. PCC will eventually put some practical training out, I think. And
Charlotte, would you just pop to the resources page on the toolkit where all the current training is listed? So this is not something you have to log into the toolkit to get to. We're just on the general RDA toolkit page, and then under learning resources, we've got a fantastic list of lots of free stuff, including our stuff, which does start very much with the jargon and the concepts.
And our stuff is available to use how you want. It's released under the kind of license where if you need to change things and build things and do things differently, you're welcome to build on what we have done. And if you look at it, you will also see that, particularly in those earlier ones, that phase 1 training, we link out to other training that is already available on the RDA training channel, on YouTube and that sort of thing. Yes.
Lots of free stuff already out there.
You know, we were not going to reinvent the wheel for training. Particularly that phase 1 training was very much about wading through all the stuff that's available and just finding some selected things.
Yeah, we should wrap this up because we have to be out of this room in a few minutes. So can you pop back to the slides, Charlotte?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think we've...
Because then we've got our email address. Very happy to answer questions in more detail and depth.
Okay, so thank you, Teresa, Anouskha and Charlotte. It's been great to hear the New Zealand story. But the story doesn't stop here. On June 11th, we'll hear the Australian story, an introduction to the official RDA project in Australia by Program Coordinator at National and State Libraries Australasia and co-leads Melissa Parent and Colleen Hayes. You can register through details through your local networks or ORDAC website, and I've got the little QR code in my little picture there, but I'm not appearing on the big screen, so it might be a little bit hard for you to pick up that QR code. So we'll try and get it out in the networks, but we're going to have the advertising details on the ORDAC website too. So thank you very much, New Zealand, for sharing your story. And I put the little link to Niche Academy in the chat for everyone there, but I really recommend accessing those resources, having a look, coming back to them when you've got your questions. It's a really great resource, and thank you for, I guess, leading the way in Oceania, New Zealand. Really appreciate your time and your effort to share this with us. You all take care.